I was in a really good position. I still had this love and curiosity for the medicine, but I had, 56 years of life experience that included some of the toughest things we all face. Because the way we complete things, the way we end things, affects the way we look back on everything that came before. And it affects the generations after. You face failure and be driving towards success. You can, we can cope with complexities like that. We don't all have to have it simplified for us. The biggest predictor of success is grit. We hear that all the time. If someone had have said that to me in the middle of burnout, it would have been bad advice. Burn your boats, which is great, but make sure there's nobody else in them. I totally lost the things that I love to do, like swimming or skiing or, going out and having fun, and I just forgot it all, which is luckily I've regained that. But I think I hear that in early entrepreneurs, so I'm obsessed with it. And that 0 to 1 mentality, I want to create something, I want to do something that's new, is then very different to the 1 to 100 mentality. It's right, who's the market, who actually wants this, who's got a so what, who, if something is terrible going to happen without it. That's where I just have to keep on finding the market. And that's another failure, that I've done regularly, nodding my head and go, yeah, I get it, when I really don't. And so then I'm pitching to investors. Like you said, there aren't that many social impact investors. The ones, the VCs who'll give you enough money to make it work, are not, that they want revenue. Come back to us when you've already got revenue. I'm like, well, I don't need your money then. I need your money now.
I was the same.
And they'll just give you the money when you don't need it.
Yeah.
So it does tie you up in knots.
Just before we get started, if you're enjoying the podcast, can you please make sure you subscribe or follow my channel? This helps me out tremendously. Merran Cooper, welcome to the Fail Wisdom podcast. Great to have you on.
Hi, Paul. Thanks to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'm very much looking forward to this talk.
Yeah, I am also. And you are the founder of Touchstone Life Care. And it's an area that people don't really want to talk a lot about, but I think it's a conversation that's really important. And something that has to be explored more, and people need to be more open to talking about that, because what you're doing in that space, and you'll explain that, is really helping a lot of people at the end of life, I guess. So to start, just tell us the story behind Touchstone Life Care and what motivated you to start this initiative and what it is, I guess.
Oh, thanks. I started Touchstone Life Care around 6 years ago, so it's been 6 years of hard work so far. And the reason is I was in this very unusual position of being a newly trained doctor, but I was 56 years old. So I started med in my 50s. And I'd worked in healthcare all my life as a physio. I'd been around people at the end of their life in my personal life as well as my physio world. But as a doctor on the wards in the middle of the night, I saw things happening that I hadn't really understood prior. And what was happening was a lot of elderly people were coming, often with dementia, and they had no ability to speak up to themselves and tell us what they wanted. So in the absence of what we call an advanced care plan, people who made decisions about the medical treatment without really knowing what that person wanted. And a lot of the decisions were made because these are the guidelines for treating pneumonia. But the guidelines for treating pneumonia are written for all ages, not necessarily for a 97-year-old with advanced dementia who might not choose the really aggressive treatments that we were often giving them, which involved holding little old ladies down while we inserted cannulas and things. And not only that, but it's an incredible inefficiency when you have to ring around and try to find out, does anybody know what this person wants to do for them? So I started Touchstone Life Care to be essentially an electronic version of advanced care plans that could be done ahead of need and available at the point of need. And the challenge has always been the fact that these plans and conversations happen well in advance, but somehow they have to appear in a completely different place, like an ED department, years after the conversation was made. So that meant we took a platform approach, and we had to have a platform that would allow an intuitive online tool that could be embedded in the workflows of aged care providers and others who have to do this stuff, but then have that plan in real time, 24/7, anywhere, anytime, any device. And that's what we've done.
Yeah. So you're bringing advanced care planning into the 21st century and using technology that's available, that's been available for quite a while. But a lot of these things are really behind the times, aren't they?
Yeah, it was a no-brainer. It was like, why has nobody done this before now? Why are there not government bodies doing this? And it was a good 6 years ago. So the concept of having data available in an interoperable way was not happening at all. We were still writing medical notes on paper. So now, of course, digital health interoperability is the buzzword, and it's all about interoperable and integrating systems. But that's coming from the top down. You need a carrot and stick approach to drag providers into the 24th century with you. And so here in Australia, because we have this very compliance-driven healthcare system where you have to meet certain requirements and compliance drivers, if your needs for compliance don't match the move towards digital health interoperability, then it's very hard to get buy-in from the providers who are the integral part of the health system. So our health system comprises people, their families, their non-professional carers, their GP, ambulance, home care providers, residential care providers, ED wards, ICU, allied health. And they're not speaking to each other. So we talk about continuum of care, coordinated care, and if that person's data is not available wherever they are, and it should be, then the system is breaking down. And who's responsible for ensuring there are infrastructure in place to transport people's data wherever we transport people? Nobody really has grabbed that and run with it. So we tried, but not intentionally. The intention was to partner with government providers, but that's very difficult to do.
Yeah. Always, as a startup, try to work with governments and get funding and do that sort of thing is usually very difficult, very slow. Sometimes there's like a different mentality in those organizations. People, they haven't got that sort of startup mentality. People that maybe been with the government for 40 years and, they're not as progressive, I guess you could say, as startups. And look, I'm only saying that because I worked for government organizations for 20 years and they talked about innovation all the time. And I was actually doing innovation, but there was absolutely no support for that. So I know it can be difficult. It's like some governments are probably good, but hopefully that, more and more will come on board with this and see the benefits of it as well. So
it is all about accountability. I mean, if people's jobs don't make them accountable to demonstrate innovation, well, they might need to demonstrate innovation. And how do you what are the KPIs for innovation? The KPIs for innovation, because the name of this podcast is Fail Wisdom. KPIs for innovation should be show us how you failed.
Exactly.
But if that's not what people get paid to do, then it will never happen.
Yeah, they just want to keep in that safe space. And I actually talked to somebody in a government department recently, and it was just shocking the stuff that he was saying, to be honest. It was like, all as we do, we know, all as we do is just keep the boss happy, even if it's a stupid idea, then we do it. And if we have a great idea and realize that then we just don't do it because, and it's just, sometimes the system works like that, which is really terrible. But we're not going to resolve that today, I suppose. But
No. But
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
So
what you're talking about is the nature of change, and people are inherently scared of change, or in many cases overwhelmed or overburdened by change. In aged care now, they've had too much change too fast. And so I can totally understand people, if it's not their wheelhouse to embrace change and drive it, then they're not going to do it. And I think that's what makes entrepreneurs different.
yeah,
When you speak about, I mean, this is a podcast for entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are inherently interested in change and driving it. And that 0 to 1 mentality, I want to create something, I want to do something that's new, is then very different to the 1 to 100 mentality about how do we implement this? How do we bring people along who are averse to change or a little bit scared of it? So, I mean, I think entrepreneurs are really important people to be cared for and supported, because you rarely get change without them.
Yeah, exactly. We are a unique breed, and that's just because I'm very much like that. Sometimes I get frustrated with people that aren't, and I think that's why we sort of group together and we relate to each other, because others, even my family, is like, he's nuts. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you taking risks? What are you doing
Yes.
this project for now?
Yeah.
You know, they
And you
just don't get
mentioned
it.
the word risk, which I've been thinking about in thinking about this conversation. In my world, I'm very much focused on helping people as much as I can have a good death. Because the way we complete things, the way we end things, affects the way we look back on everything that came before. And it affects the generations after. I was talking to a man yesterday. His 97-year-old lady died, and she had 97-year-old mother. And he
Yeah.
said it was a good death. Very sad, but good.
Mhm.
And so I'm often focused on what are the most important things about life, what makes a good death, what makes a good life. And
Yeah.
one of the biggest things that people say at the end of their life, the biggest regret is, I didn't take enough risks.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I find that fascinating, that most people don't regret what they did. They
Yeah.
regret what they didn't do.
Yeah, exactly. Not many people would be ending their life and saying, "Oh, I wish I didn't take so many risks." It's pretty much the opposite. Yeah, I've heard that as well. That's really interesting. So, hopefully, as entrepreneurs, in that respect, our death will be a little bit nicer, so to speak. And talking about a good death, you talk about a good. So, what? Look, I have an idea what that is, but what would you describe as a good death?
Oh, I don't think it's really up to me to describe what is a good death. I think it's up to
Mhm.
everybody to describe it for
Mhm.
themselves, and then try
Okay.
and implement or take action that will give it the best chance of happening. I think
Mm.
it's like saying, describe happiness. For me, it is different for everybody.
Yeah, good point.
I think some people want to be alone, and some people want to have others around them. Some
Mhm.
people want to talk about it, others do not.
Mhm.
But whatever brings you peace is a good
Mhm.
death in my mind.
Mhm.
Um, And if you find it's okay to leave some things unresolved and you still have peace around that, that's a good death too. I honestly would not prescribe to someone else what a good death is. I do think that we often step in and think we know, but it's very similar. Having conversations around dying, believe it or not, is very similar to any other conversations we have, including customer discovery conversations as an entrepreneur, because you have to take off your coat of thinking what you know. I know this. I know my product. I know how good it is. I know the customer's problems. I'm going to
The
tell
biggest
them how
mistake.
I fix it all for them. And so when we have those conversations, it's like, tell me how things are for you. Tell me how you could pick this will look like for you. And we ask questions. It's exactly the same in those end of life conversations.
Yeah, it's interesting, but a key word that kept coming up just then was peace. So I think, everyone's different, but being at peace with whatever it is, I think is key to that. And having like I read on your website, dementia patients, and you did talk about this with the gastric tube restrained, so they didn't pull out the tube, all that sort of stuff happening. That's not a peaceful way to go, and it's horrible. Even if you think about your own, like your mother or your father, I mean, my mother died about 8 months ago, and fortunately she never had to go to residential care. She was looked after by my brother very well, and my sister-in-law. So I would describe that as a good death, but there was no interventions or anything like that, and so I think that's really important in some way.
Yeah. I think in medicine, making space for people to have peace is really important. Not encroaching on it and taking that away from them, but enabling it, helping create it, making space for it, staying in a way. We don't get taught that stuff. We get taught how to go in and do things. And it's very much the same as an entrepreneur who says, hey, I've got this great treatment that's going to solve your problems. I'm going to give it to you. Rather than, is it of any use to you? Is this actually one of the key influences in my life actually happened. I was 24 and my husband died, so he'd been ill for 11 months with leukemia. And it was a long time ago. The treatments back then were horrific. So at the end of 11 months, it was exhausting, but there was lots of, you've got to fight this, you've got to be positive, and that sense of beating cancer was very much there. Nobody mentioned the D word, you're going to die, until he was given 3 weeks to live. And then he came home, we were looking after you at home, and a family friend visited who said, Mark, what nobody has said is you're going to die. And whether it's in 3 weeks or he was given choices like you can have another bone marrow transplant or you could do more chemo. And so this man said, if you have more chemo, you've got 3 months. If you have another bone marrow transplant, you might die or you might have 30 years. But face that fact. You might die now or in 30 years' time. Speak to Merran. Tell her you love her. Speak to God. Talk to your parents. And then at the same time, move forwards and have that bone marrow transplant and be positive. So I think 2 things can be true at the same time. You can face failure and be driving towards success. You can, we can cope with complexities like that. We don't all have to have it simplified for us.
Yeah, no, that's true. And talking about failures, like, you're an entrepreneur and you're a startup founder. And so, as we said, this podcast is all about learning from failures. So could you tell us, like a time when you faced a significant setback or failure with your Touchstone Life Care and how you overcame it?
Sure. So with Touchstone Life Care, we started as a B2C. We put like an MVP out as a B2C on it. It had lots of 3,500 users. It was free. And then in order to progress, we built a B2B as well to sell software to these providers who are tasked with doing advanced care planning. But it was very hard to find people who wanted to try it in the first instance. We built the product with a lot of co-design and a lot of interest over a couple of years, but then COVID hit, and the people who said they would use this once it was built were too busy with COVID. And so I was stuck with a product for 2 years that we couldn't sell to the people with whom it had been designed and for whom it had been designed. So I just had to shut it all down. I couldn't get funding because there were no sales. And I essentially had to just close it down. I couldn't have just quit at that time. But there's that, what's the saying, lost cost sunk, or cost sunk bias, that you invested so much.
Yeah,
And
I
so
know that
many
well.
people were saying, if anybody can do this, you can, Merran, which I don't think is always a very good thing to say to people.
Yeah.
So I just had to sort of sit, I did a capital raise and we didn't get any money. And then I had to sort of admit, well, that was a failed raise. We couldn't get any funds. And so we just had to plod along a bit longer. I tried to get buy-in from large government bodies' interest. And I've continued, but that has come up against this, I think, fear of competition. They saw me as a competitor rather than a collaborator. Those words were used to me.
Really?
So I failed to get the right message across to government bodies that, hey, I'm here to support you in the work, and can we collaborate together? I could be the technology provider, you're the experts, let's work together. And I failed to deliver that message well. So if you pull apart your failures, I must have failed to ask the right questions. I must have failed to get into their mindset and ask the right questions, rather than I probably tried to push my product onto them or push a partnership onto them. So I think over and over, my failures have been failures of listening. Over and over. I haven't listened to the customer enough. I haven't listened to partners enough. I haven't listened to, I have listened to a lot of advisors who all give you different advice, so you can go round and round. But
Advisor whiplash.
Advisor whiplash. But it's not just a matter of listening, it's a matter of deep listening and trying, particularly your consumers or your end customer, what's in their mindset. Because that's the only thing that will get you to the so what for them. And if there is no so what, then you don't have a market.
Yeah. And it's so common. I'm guilty of the same thing. You have this amazing technology or product, and you're like, yeah, this is amazing, and this is going to be great for everybody, and you're not really listening deeply to what people are saying, or understanding their psychology as well, and the best way to approach them. And it's not easy. Like, it's trying to pitch in startup world it's a really difficult thing. It's probably one of the most difficult things that you can do. And you need to do a lot of listening and then work out your strategy, I guess.
But the biggest failure for me actually was a personal failure. I really did burn out. I've had some neck surgery. Like, I ended up having, during COVID, I had to have neck surgery, but it was delayed. It was serious. I've got 9 pieces of metal in my neck holding it together. I've had many disc fusions and stabilizations in my neck because of an inherited disease. But
Ah.
I didn't listen to it, and I kept on working. And I completely forgot that I was a mental, emotional, and physical person. I was just in the weeds of building a platform
Yeah.
and let everything go. Health, drinking water, eating well, friends, families. And that's the biggest failure. Like, I can take a risk. I can risk whatever I choose to risk. I'll burn my boats. But that's burning the boat, that's burning me, and
Burning it
that's
all down.
not good. So I learned that the hard way by ending up in surgery and having to really, I actually went to see like an Ayurvedic person who I said, look, give me a 1 hour massage that should fix me. And they just looked at me and said, no, you're needing a lot more than that. And it was about, I totally lost the things that I love to do, like swimming or skiing or, going out and having fun. And I just forgot it all, which is luckily, I've regained that. But I think I hear that in early entrepreneurs, I'm so obsessed with it. And you have to have that. But
You still got to maintain that, that life-work balance. It's so important. And so many entrepreneurs the same, do the same, so many burnouts there as well. And
if you go back to my thoughts around end of life and what really matters, family, friends, love, your personality, the things you love to do, they are critical. Not just, but it's also better for the business, because if you lose your personality, the conversations that you have with other people are flat, inauthentic, boring. You're not inspiring. Who wants to partner with you anyway? So it's better for the business, and not only your thinking and your clear thinking, but being your full expressed self is essential, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes people, like, their whole identity is with their startup or whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And we're not. We are us. That is the startup. Just like people that identify with their job role or whatever. I'm a lawyer. No, you're Paul.
Yeah.
You do. You do lawyer work. That's your job. So many people, startups, jobs. They identify with that, and then something happens, and then it's really shattering for them as well.
Yeah. That happened to me when I was a physio, and I'm doing work at an international sports level. I was quite young at the time. I would have been 31, 32 or something, maybe 33. And I had major neck surgery. And my last day working as a physio was on a mountain in Korea with the Australian ski team, holding, skiing around, being very physical, very active. And after that, I had surgery. And so I remember being introduced to someone, and I said, hi, I'm Merran. And I previously would have said, I'm Merran, I'm a physio. But I just had to say, I'm Merran, and then nothing. And it was like a big hole. It was hard to fill again.
Yeah, because you relate so much to your job or your startup or whatever. And obviously startup founders are really, really passionate.
Yeah.
And about what they're doing, but they still have to separate that and themselves.
Totally. And I remember, I think it was Richard Branson, he talks about 41% or 51%, you're either side of that line is a success or a failure. And as entrepreneurs, we're walking that line all the time. And so you can be a failure. Your business will fail often.
Yeah.
But you have to say, that doesn't mean I'm a failure.
Exactly.
I mean, going back to the things and getting a little bit sort of more granular, you asked me what are some of the other failures. Spending too much money in the beginning, especially when I was a complete target. I didn't know what I was doing. And so if somebody said, give me money, I'll advise you, I was pretty keen to do that. And you just don't realize that every last cent matters. You have to go through every line. It's like, is this essential? Is this essential? And not spend money. I think what you don't spend is as if essential, particularly in the beginning when you have to wait to find out where's my market, what do they need, and check the money in there. But before that, you just have to be so cautious with money.
Yeah. And you were bootstrapped?
Yeah, absolutely bootstrapped. So I found that I did my best work when my back was against the wall.
Right.
But because only then, and still now, my back is always against the wall as an entrepreneur, because you always need more cash or stay out more revenue. And so we just keep doing the same, we get nowhere. But only when your back is against the wall was I prepared to go, I need to reach out to investors more. I want to change my pitch. I just have to do those things I've been too scared to do until now.
Yeah. And it is scary, and a lot of people hold back and hold back and hold back. It's like calling people as well, and a lot of people are not very good at that. And sales is really important. If you don't have sales, you might have the best product out there, but you won't do anything really. Unfortunately, that's where my startup we were weak in sales and marketing, unfortunately. But how did you find the whole sales thing? Did you do it yourself, or did you get other people?
They do say that the founder's the best person to sell. But I didn't believe that. And people would tell me, you can sell this, man. You should be selling this. But I thought, no, I don't know anything about selling. And also, I sort of thought it was the devil's work in the beginning, because I came out of that nice, caring, health person point of view. But then someone said, no, Merran, you've created a platform. Your job's not done until it's out there being used. And so continue to sell. And then I didn't know how to sell. I thought I could just, because I was unsure, I didn't know how to sell. I thought I should change the way I do it and learn somebody else's skill or style. And that questions. So more recently, I have reached out to people who are sales strategy experts and put myself out there and recorded calls, which when you watch them back, you just put your head in your hands and go, oh my God, what did I say? Why didn't I shut up more? Spend less, talk less, are the two biggest things I've learned.
I used to do a community radio show years ago, and I was doing it for a couple of months, just once a week, for an hour. And then after a while, I listened to my own show, and I was driving in the car, and I was listening with my wife and daughter, and I was like, oh, does that guy ever shut up? I said about myself.
Well, this expert has had me recording, doing role plays, and another big failure of mine, and it might be the same of others, is to think if I don't know how to do something, try to figure it out myself instead of asking others. But then also, when something's brand new for me, I tend to think it's harder than it needs to be. I tend to look at the whole problem. How am I going to sell? I don't know how I'm going to sell. I'll never be able to sell. How can I sell? But when I get an expert who breaks it down, 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, then I go, oh, it's not so hard. It's completely the opposite of what I was doing. But it's not so hard. What's hard is retraining yourself so that becomes natural and not my old ways, which were always jumping in and providing an answer.
I did some sales training. There was some, I worked out at the Macquarie Incubator. There were some really good salespeople there, but I don't think I became a good salesperson. I mean, I became close to some really big deals, but I think it's just about also being authentic and not thinking that you're selling. That's the thing, or not being, which is hard. Like if you don't have any sales and you're running out of money, not to be desperate, which you might be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just be really confident in yourself, and it's easy to say, but when you're at certain stages, it's not that easy to do.
And going back to listening, like listening to the no's and listening to the yeses.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
we discard what we don't want to hear.
yeah,
And if people say, no, I don't want your product because we're happy doing it the way we're doing it now, I
yeah,
immediately go, don't you know what's going to happen to those pieces of paper? Your little old ladies are going to be strung out in hospital. It's a terrible thing, but they don't see that. That my
mm,
aged care providers don't see what happens to their people in hospital. It's not in front of
mm,
their faces, so they can't
yeah,
see it. And if their drivers are to do the least we can to comply with the money that we've got, we look after our people while they're here with us, we haven't got
yeah,
anything, well, then I listen to that and I go, well, you know what? That's not my market. I have to
no,
find who's the market somewhere else. And the shoulds in me that say you should be doing more uh, is useless. It's like, who's the
yeah,
market? Who actually wants this? Who's
yeah,
got a so what? Who, if something is terrible going to happen without it? That's where I just have to keep on finding the market. And I was listening to another podcast recently where they were talking about, creating great things, but then finding the market for it, which I used to think
yeah,
was putting the cart before the horse. You've got to go out there and find the market and then build to what they want. But there are
yeah.
some others who say if you're thinking about a systems approach or you're a futuristic thinker, and you can see what needs to be done, then it's finding the market for it is as much your job as building the thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because you always told customer discovery first,
Yeah,
and then you
yeah.
go on that. So yeah, that's
I mean, I
interesting
think
concept.
that's for when you're building products that are a bit futuristic. So
Mhm.
another failure of mine really was being too early,
Yeah,
literally
I know that.
6, 7 years too early.
Yeah,
Um, and that means you have to have a long enough runway. So
yeah,
if you have a great idea and it's a long way ahead of where things are at now, you
mm,
need a big runway, or you need a lot of investment, or you change your product to be incrementally changed, or you spend a lot of time creating a market for it.
yeah, yeah. Like I can relate to that because we started with ours. It was VR in early 2017. It was really early days. People didn't even understand what VR was, and yeah, we were way too early. And I remember doing a demonstration once with that time you had to put like a phone into a headset, and I think we had seven, and I think only one worked.
Yeah,
Whereas now you get to put on like these amazing headsets, and
yeah. Or you just put
um,
the glasses on.
yeah. And so at the time I thought, oh look, we're like the first in Australia doing this simulated,
Mm,
360 video VR scenarios, helping. And we were looking at aged care.
yeah,
When COVID hit, we were just about to take off, and COVID hit. Then we were in hospitality area because my co-founder was in that, and that's pretty much they don't want to spend money either. Believe me. Then we were looking at aged care. It would be great for aged care to train, people in like how to deal with dementia patients and all that sort of thing, so they actually experience it. But same thing, funding. Nobody wants to pay.
no. And you just don't get that until you're in the weeds and you've invested a lot of money. You just don't
Yeah,
get that people
yeah,
will not pay for it until
yeah,
you've asked. I mean, that's very much part of your product market fit, isn't it? That early testing. So, for
yeah.
example, we put a free product out at B2C and loads of people used it and said it was great. But I should have
Mhm.
put and I thought, I don't want people to be paying for this. And back, freemium model was the go. But I
Yeah,
didn't. Another failure was not understanding that will people pay for it is the essential question
Yeah.
to ask early, and putting a price on your beta products and everything early, I think is essential to know if
Yeah.
it's a goer or not.
Yeah, that's right. Because you may, not waste years and years of development, something that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean that goes against all of the other things I was just saying, where you build a platform and then you create a market. But I think that's for very futuristic things. If you can get the funding that's going
Yeah.
to last you long enough to build
Yeah.
something big enough, and then create a market, that's a big, big hairy goal. If your
Yeah,
big
it is.
hairy goal is
Yeah.
something that people are going to pay for now, you have to put a price on it to test it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, in some cases it could be that other, but most of the time you really want to know as soon as possible, is this really going to work? Do people really want it, and will they pay for it?
Yeah,
Can
and
save you a lot of grief.
hearing that no is so hard to hear. It's, oh,
Yeah.
they will. I'll
Yeah.
just make it better. Or people
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
back at you and
Exactly.
they say, yeah, I'd pay for it if it had X, Y, and Z. But I
Yeah.
think that's a
Yeah.
distraction. I think, and then you go and you build X, Y, and Z, and they'll still kick it along the ground further down the road
Yeah.
for you to chase and build more features and
Yeah.
spend more money and
Yeah.
then
Exactly.
not buy.
The great example, I interviewed one of the founders of Twitter. His nickname is Rabble.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that.
And he said, we did a hackathon. We came up with 6 things, and one of them was Twitter, and they went with 3. One was Twitter. And people say, it looks like you could create that in one day. He said, yeah, we did in 6 hours. Right? So, and then they iterated and improved it with constant customer feedback, as they went. So even I think the Microsoft, some sort of, I forget what it's called now, really a high technology sort of headset, AR, VR, quite a while ago. The first one was done like made with a coat hanger or something like that. So, and that was, I think it was, no, it was Google. I think it was Google. So it was made with a coat hanger. So sometimes you don't need to have the big, platform. And I recently interviewed a girl in the retail space making a platform there. And she said, I don't have a minimum viable product. I have a minimum lovable product. And then I thought, oh, that's great that you love your product, but that can sometimes be a problem because you just keep working on it and building it
Yeah,
more and more and more.
yeah,
You love it, but you want, other people to actually
yeah,
love it and buy it as
yeah.
well.
I think,
And I actually sent her an email a few weeks after the podcast saying, I'm actually a little bit worried about that. Have a think about this and this and this.
wow.
So
Look, I've
yeah,
fallen into that trouble. Um,
yeah,
the other thing that's been hard in and we're focusing on the hards in this podcast,
mm,
but the other thing that's been
yeah,
hard has been, because mine is a medico-legal product, I can't get away
mm,
with an MVP that easily because we're sharing sensitive health data here.
yeah,
So the
yeah,
security has
yeah,
to be there, the consent
mm,
procedures, the legality. So I had to spend a lot of money on legals right in the first instance. And I
yeah,
have had challenges to it, but so that money was well spent. But
okay,
so that's hard when it's health stuff. You can't get away with, you're not just creating and selling handbags that it doesn't
yeah,
matter if they break.
yeah.
This
Yeah,
matters if it breaks.
yeah, and that's really interesting, and it's a really good point. And so, on that point, like, what advice would you give aspiring entrepreneurs or founders who are looking to start their own social enterprise or startup in the healthcare sector? What sort of advice can you give them? Because specific to that.
I I I'm not really in the business of giving advice anymore because I've had so much advice given to me that it's conflicting. I don't know where the person is to hear it, what space they're in. If somebody had said to me when I was
Yeah,
in the middle of burnout, perseverance, got to keep going.
yeah,
The biggest predictor of success is grit. We hear that all the time. If someone had have said
right.
that to me in the middle of burnout, it would have been bad advice. So it
Definitely.
depends where you're at. I think
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
deep listening to the customer
Hmm.
and finding out
Hmm.
who your customer is, who's the paying customer, who's going to buy it. So I had a conversation with some people recently, large enterprise group, and the
Yeah.
lady at the end of the call was saying, what we need is an online intuitive tool that's embedded in our workflow processes that makes an advanced care plan available anywhere. And, this is what I've built over the previous 6 years.
Yeah.
And I just had to stop myself from saying, oh, no, will you listen to me? Instead, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, great, let's have a conversation about that. So, being where the customer is at,
Yeah.
being where your paying customer is at, not being ahead of them in those conversations, being where they are at, um, even though you know that you can solve their problems.
Yeah.
So being where the customer is at, and then controlling the conversation with the questions that you ask. So
Yes.
another piece of advice is the person who asks the most questions is the person in control. And that
Mm.
ask more questions, and that includes of your advisors. So getting really comfortable with being the dumbest person in the room. I didn't know what
Yeah.
SEO stood for when I started.
Mm.
So I've just had to ask really basic questions of sales and marketing, finance, lawyers, corporate
Yeah.
lawyers. Tell me what a
Hmm.
holding company is, really basic. But when you ask and you listen to their answers, and then you ask the next question, which might be based on their original answer, they respect you and they give you more, whether they are a customer or an advisor. So I think the only advice I would give would be take off your I know this coat and ask more questions.
That's actually really good advice, just in general for anything, really, I think, you know.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Asking questions and active listening, not
Deep
thinking,
listening and prodding. If they give you an answer, prod.
yeah.
Expand on that. Tell me more, because that's another failure, that I've done regularly, nodding my head and go, yeah, I get it, when I really don't. And often I'll be having a conversation with someone who's much more knowledgeable than me in their area, and I'm Googling on the side. They use a word, they use some lingo,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah,
Googling it
okay.
on the side.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I've been known to do that a lot, and I didn't have a business background either, so I had to learn all this stuff as well. Like,
yeah,
I had no idea, and yeah, it's just like if you're just open and honest, people are fine, you know.
yeah. I think
And,
the biggest failure is not being authentic, like you just said.
exactly.
It really and truly is. And the biggest
Yeah,
failure is having the wrong intent. Um, and that can include, I'm doing this because I want to prove to my dad I can run a business. I'm doing this because I want to make a whole lot of money, because that will give me the status I don't have otherwise. I'm doing this
yeah,
because I'm the only person in the world who can improve end of life care. Anything like that is based on anything other than we're just individual people, are equally important as other people. As soon as your intention's wrong, you're inauthentic, it's going to be a failure one way or the other.
yeah. People can pick up inauthenticity straight away, as they can when you're authentic, you know, and people appreciate
Well, and
authenticity.
again, as a startup entrepreneur, that is a little bit fraught, because you have to pitch. You have to have the
Yeah,
confidence. So,
yeah,
I've got this big, hairy goal, and I've got this brilliant market. The product market fit is there, and it's fantastic. So you're supposed to say all of that in order to get the investors on board. And I think that the environment in previous years led to, hey, brilliant pitch. I'm going to make loads of money for us all.
Yeah.
It's very fraught because you've got to be confident. Who wants to invest in somebody that goes, nah, 49%, 51%, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to have
No,
to
but you
figure
can be
out.
authentic and confident.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the absolute sweet spot. I had an investor say to me recently, okay, Merran, tell me the good, the bad, and the ugly. And they wanted to know the ugly.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And the whole investment stage, that's a whole another minefield as well. And especially if you're doing something in the social enterprise space, it's much harder to get funding because like the VCs, they're looking for the unicorns, the $1 billion, so, and then at the other end, you've got the mum and dad investors, and then you've got that gap between. And I've done a couple of podcasts with Len for Good, Cameron Neal, and a few others, David Carbines, where they're sort of in that space, but there needs to be a lot more investors in that space, helping people that are trying to do something, in the social enterprise space.
Yeah.
Even like talking about being authentic as well. When I started this podcast, I've got some other startup friends, and they're saying, and I say, look, I'm really passionate about the social enterprise impact, all that sort of space. I
Yeah.
said, yeah, but just think about like, if you want to get sponsorship later, there's not much money in that space. And I was just like, you know what? I just want to do what I believe in and just let it roll as it rolls. Look, I'm not going to be inauthentic and just interview people in spaces that it's just like, I'm not interested in, and I don't.
No.
It's not that I don't believe in it,
No.
but you need to do something that you're in an area that you're passionate about as well. I think it's really
and
important.
look, trying to be authentic with you now, for me, the difficulty is coming back all the time to what was my intention. And one of my family and friends investors said, Merran, why did you start this? And I started it because I wanted there to be electronic advanced care plans that worked. I
Yeah.
did not want to rule the world. But then somebody said, well, yeah, but you've got to sell it to finish off that intention. So you have to learn how to sell. And to learn how to sell, I've got to really get some investment behind me to do the sale and the marketing and the team. So then I'm pitching to investors. Like you said, there aren't that many social impact investors. The ones, the VCs who'll give you enough money to make it work are not that they want revenue. Come back to us when you've already got revenue. I'm like, well, I don't need your money then. I need your money
Yeah,
now.
I was the same. I was the
And they'll
same.
just give you the money
Exactly.
when you don't need it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it does tie you up in knots. Am I
Yeah.
selling my soul to and being that person that the government funded bodies say, oh, you shouldn't be making money out of dying people? I've had that said to me.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
horrible.
it's dreadful. And that really cut me because I went,
Oh,
they are really questioning my intent. They've got every right to question my intent. But that comes back to, for me, entrepreneurship, and I'm going to use this word, it's almost a spiritual journey. You have to go,
it is.
what's my intent? What's my mental, physical, emotional growth? Am I destroying any of that? How am I learning and growing? And I have to be able to take people saying, I think you're in this for the wrong reasons, and know that I'm not, and not be affected by it. So it's more than a business, it's a personal growth.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why you really need to understand why you're doing this at the beginning. And like you said, don't do it for money. Do it if it's something you believe in, and don't do it, to look good with your friends, or you think it's really cool, or whatever it is.
That's a
It's a hard
recipe for
journey.
disaster because you
It is.
will be obsessed. You will sacrifice. And the other thing is,
Yeah,
what are you prepared to sacrifice? So I've
yeah,
been prepared to sacrifice a lot, but not my family. And
yeah,
I even sacrificed my health, but I won't anymore. And
yeah,
but we use the term burning your boats. Burn your boats, which is great. but make sure there's nobody else in them. Like, don't burn your
Yeah,
family, or make sure you've got your family sorted.
yeah,
They're not going to suffer. You can suffer, or you choose to sacrifice what you choose, but you can't foist it on other people.
absolutely. Really great advice. And when I the first years of the startup, quite often I'd work late at nights because we had a developer in the Ukraine,
Yeah,
and then we'd be like nights and nights, really long hours.
yeah,
And now I'm just like, even with the podcast, I don't like to do it late.
no,
I did one yesterday, just at 5 o'clock. It wasn't a big deal, because in the UK it was like 8 in the morning, and this gentleman runs it's sort of an investment fund that where the employees become the owners of it. Like
great.
people, like in the late years, sell the business. So it was really something I really thought was wonderful. But generally, because sometimes I interview people in the UK or the US, I don't. I try and do it even like 7 in the morning,
Yeah, yeah.
rather than do the things at night. I need to be the
I've done
family at home.
all-nighters, especially when you're trying to keep up with developments with developers.
Yeah,
I've done
yeah,
all-nighters too often, and I won't
yeah.
anymore.
No,
Yeah.
no. Yeah. So, yeah. So, okay. So moving forward, what's next
Yeah,
for
well, we're
you
having
and
discussions
Touchstone?
now with sort of larger enterprise partners and groups, um,
Great.
and also overseas. To be honest, Austrade, New South Wales Investment, they've really supported me to go overseas. You often get more support to export
Yeah.
your product, your technology product,
Yeah.
than have it
It's
taken
interesting.
up in Australia,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a crazy thing.
It is.
But
But quite often somebody will export overseas, and then they'll get a lot of traction there, and then people here will like, oh, okay,
I think
we've
one
got a
of the
lot of
biggest
traction over there.
examples of that is FHIR, FHIR standards, which were developed by Graham Grieve here in Australia, and
Mhm.
are used all around the world. And now back in Australia, we're finally sort of adopting them. So that maybe that's what happens in Australia. You have to prove yourself overseas before you get picked up back here. I don't know.
It's interesting, and I do know, like with investment, apparently in the US, it like if you're a US citizen, it's a lot easier to get funding, and that whole thing was, you said before, yeah, if you start getting customers, paying customers, and getting traction, then we'll look at it. And I'm the same. Like, well, if I can start getting paying customers, then that's money coming into the business. Then why do I want to get investment? And I was the same with that. But apparently in the US, they're much more likely to take you on with your idea, um, rather than just having
Yeah, yeah,
paying traction and paying
yeah,
customers. But then again, if you're an Australian, it is harder if you go over there, because you're not from
yeah,
there, and they worry about
absolutely.
certain things.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
so we have got paths to sales in Canada, and because that border is a little bit sort of not very solid, from Canada into Canadian companies
Mhm.
sell into the US. So
Yeah.
it's very much a channel partner strategy, and building those partnerships takes a
Yeah.
while, but that
Yeah.
allows you to have a product that can be sold at scale.
Okay. And one other thing I was going to ask you as well. So you became a doctor at 50, which I really commend you for doing that, because everyone knows being a doctor is just a quick 6 month course. No, it's pretty easy. So 7 years full on. But I actually do believe that we need a lot more mature doctors, because just going back to as well, like people's motivations. There's some cultures there's like they want their sons and daughters, if they're doctors or lawyers, and that's it, and they push them towards that, and they're not really suited. They have to be, empathetic, compassionate, and some of them, if they're in there just for the status type of thing, and they're too young, they haven't got a lot of life experience. I don't think that makes for a good doctor personally. So I think someone who's empathetic, who has a lot of life experience, makes the best doctors, I would say. And obviously, some doctors over a long period of time, they can get that. But I really commend you on that. And I've heard, this is quite a while ago now, that one of the universities here in, I don't know where you studied, I think it was Sydney Uni, right? But I heard Newcastle Uni was much more open years ago to taking mature students to train as
Yeah, I
doctors.
think I remember my very first day sitting in Sydney Uni, big auditorium hall, and the people down the front, the lecturers were saying, no, we've got people from 35 countries and 18 or hundreds of different pre-professions because it's a postgrad degree, and
Oh.
ages ranging from 19 to, he looked down, he went, a lot more than that. And I was right up in the back row. But sort of, I think that's me he's talking about. But what was really interesting was that when we actually spoke about the age gap different. Now, I was 51, my colleagues were 21. And if we spoke
Mm,
about medicine and the body and the things we were learning, there was this fascination, and age didn't matter, in fact.
yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and look, back to your point about being older or younger, again, it's individuals. You want a young, fit, energetic emergency surgeon who
Mhm.
can work all night. That you don't want an old 75-year-old rescuing you hanging off a cliff. So there's a place for a
Okay.
lot of different ages,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
do think there is a role for older people in in medicine who haven't already been in it for 30 years and lost their love and passion by the time they're 60,
Mm,
who's still got. So I was in a really good position. I still had this love and curiosity for the medicine, but I had, 56 years of life experience that included some of the toughest things we all face. So
yeah.
you could um, look somebody in the eye and know or feel, a mother of a dying child. You could look
Mm,
her in the eye and go, connect in a way that a 23-year-old who'd never had a child couldn't.
yeah.
So, yeah, there's a role, but horses for courses, different parts of
Yeah.
medicine need different skills.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're obviously a very determined person, like to do all that you've done, studying to be a doctor at 50 now with a startup. You certainly didn't pick the easy routes, that's for sure.
No, I got waylaid. I had a gap year. I got into med after school, and then I got waylaid, and I did physio. I loved physio. I had to
Uh-huh.
stop because of this stuff on my neck. I went
Yeah.
teaching, science teaching. I had 3 kids. We were on a farm. And the
Mhm.
teaching, at that time, I learned a lot about genetics. I got really interested in genetics. I was teaching biology, chemistry, physics. Got really
Yep.
interested in the genetics. And then I was working in the Centre for Genetics Education in Sydney. And we were helping people make decisions about if they had an inherited cancer gene. So this was a really interesting time in the early 2000s when we were just learning about the genome, mapping the
Yeah.
genome for the first time. And you might remember people were getting the breast cancer gene, the BRCA gene, and then
Hmm.
we would make decision aids for them. Okay, I've got the BRCA gene. Does that mean I'm going to have a double mastectomy like Angelina Jolie did, sort of,
Hmm.
or have my ovaries out? At what time do I have children? And we were making decision aids to people, and we were also teaching doctors how to break bad news. Like if you get the gene, how do you tell somebody you've
It's a
got the
skill.
gene? So we were
Yeah.
helping doctors have those conversations. And that's when I went, I want to be the doctor. I don't want to teach them anymore. And
Mm.
and and it turns out I'd done a master's along the way, so I'd done enough education and I got in. And now Touchstone Life Care is essentially a decision aid. So it's really interesting how the crumbs of your life lead you to where you are at.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and it's an amazing journey that you've been on, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us. And I'm sure a lot of people can learn from this, not just startup founders, but just wisdom in general. Your life wisdom is wonderful, and I wish Touchstone Life Care and yourself every great success. We'll leave the details in the show
Thank
notes.
you.
So if people would like to contact you, I encourage them to.
Great.
And if any investors out there, listen to this, well, hopefully they will fund something that's really, really important.
Terrific.
So,
Thank you so much.
yeah.
It's been an absolute delight, Paul. It's really been fun.